everybody, it is time for No Limits. Oh, I like to make that very loud because you know what? When I go loud, anything can happen. But boy, we have a great broadcast tonight. I've been looking for this one for a long time, and I'm pleased to be joined by Kevin Anderson, who's the Senior Athletic Director at Air Force Academy. And he's also the former athletic director from the University of Maryland. You were there for 7 years, who took Maryland from the ACC to the Big Ten and was the mastermind behind the move. So, Kevin, it's a pleasure to have you on the show tonight. And over the course of the next period of time, we're going to talk about everything we can about not only where you have been, but college athletics and everything that associated with it. So I have prepared myself for a long show because I guarantee my goal here is to educate, inform, have fun, and make sure the individuals that have questions. I can tell you one thing. I guarantee you one thing, Kevin. No stone will be left unturned.
Well, Scott, thank you for having me. Look forward to having this time with you.
All right, so let me go over a couple things here. Since joining the Big Ten in 2014, the Terps have combined to win 49 championships. That's unbelievable. And that's the third most in that time frame behind only Michigan and Ohio State. So, Kevin, before we get to that, okay, I know you probably took a lot of pride in that. Well, give me your thoughts about that first.
Well, as we were talking last week, Scott, it was eye-opening to me when we first started to approach even going into the Big Ten. And then the day that we did it, traveling from Chicago back to Maryland, there were several publications throughout the schools at the Big Ten, the Chicago Tribune, the Iowa, whatever the Iowa paper is, that said that why would the Big Ten take a bottom feeder? And so they thought that we would not be competitive in the Big Ten. And my time there in the Big Ten, we won 25 Big Ten championships. And at that time, it was the most, even more than Michigan and Ohio State.
Well, I think one of the reasons that Maryland was brought into the Big Ten, my understanding, is the Big Ten wanted a piece of, with Rutgers, the metropolitan New York area, and with you guys, they wanted the Washington area as well, don't they? And I you know what? People can say bottom feeder all they want, but Maryland has a heck of a basketball program. We all know Gary Williams won a national championship there. We know that Bobby Ross went out there and had a good run there. We know Frank Reich, I believe, graduated. So for people that want to underestimate the Terps, that's a bad move. But, so when you talk, is it true that the Big Ten wanted the Washington, Baltimore metropolitan area in there?
Oh, no, absolutely, Scott. This was more driven by media than it was by anything else, such as everything that we see going on now. I mean, these mergers and these acquisitions from one conference to another, it's basically for media dollars.
Okay. All right, I have to get into this. Let's talk about your Hall of Fames mentioned. You said you're in a couple, so I'll let you go ahead and explain to me how well you've been honored and by where.
Well, I've been blessed that my colleagues, other athletic directors voted me into the Hall of Fame. I believe it was in 2019, 2020 during COVID, and then I was elected to represent San Francisco State, and I'm in their Hall of Fame as well.
Okay. All right, let's go to talk about your last experience, a list of your stops. I know you had a lot of them, so why don't you just break them down for us, stop by stop, and then we'll proceed thereafter.
Well, my first intention was never to be in college athletics. I worked 10 years for the Xerox Corporation, and while I worked for Xerox, I was a high school and college football official. A friend of mine told me that there was a position open in the Stanford athletic department. He asked me for my resume, and so I gave it to him. And side story, I had a close family friend that was one of the first African-American football players at Stanford. So I called him and I said, I'm looking at this position at Stanford, and he chuckled and he said, you'll never get that because you're not part of the family. So I went and interviewed at Stanford with Ted Leland and Tom Beckett, and they offered me the position. So I called John that night and said, guess who's coming to dinner? Stanford was a wonderful experience. That's where I got my foundation from. And working with Ted and Tom Beckett was just unbelievable experience. And if I have had success, it's partly due to those two gentlemen and starting off there. And then, having the first job working with Bill Walsh and Mike Montgomery and all the rest of those wonderful coaches at Stanford, it was quite an experience. And then from there, I went to work for UC Berkeley. I was there for 5.5 years. I worked for another tremendous athletic director, John Kasser. We did a lot of great things at UC Berkeley. Then I went up and worked about 1.5 2 years at Oregon State with Dennis Erickson, Bob DeCarellis, and that was another learning experience. And then I was fortunate enough to get the call and become the athletic director at West Point. That was not a good job experience. It was a tremendous life experience, not only for me, but my family, the people that we met, the company that we kept. Fortunate enough there to be in the presence of two of the United States presidents, meeting all kind of leaders in our armed forces. That was a tremendous opportunity. From there, going to Maryland, and Maryland was an experience where, looking back at it, it allowed me to pursue and win national championships. And during my time at the Maryland, I think we won 7 or 8 national championships. While I was there through the ACC, we won about 9 or 10 ACC championships and then 25 Big Ten championships. Okay. Then from there, I've ended up at Air Force, and this has been quite a wonderful experience for me to end my career with these great young people and these great leaders at the Air Force Academy. And one thing I wasn't able to do at West Point, but we were able to do at Air Force this year, is win the Commanders-in-Chiefs trophy. So what else could I do? This is a wonderful way to transition into other things I will do in my life.
All right, so you bring up some interesting points. So I got to tell you, do you take a lot of pride, Kevin, that you're an African American that got a great opportunity, and you want to be able to set the example for future African Americans to be able to go ahead and take on athletic director roles? Because what your resume is nothing short of outstanding. And I think what's so cool about when I look at the fact that that the Air Force Academy invited you back to obviously lead their football program, right? And that you're currently the senior associate athletic director tied to football. And, that's a large responsibility when you have a lot of that. So I'm impressed. And I think a lot of minorities should, when they watch this show, should use you as an inspiration for them to be able to seek those types of opportunities.
Well, Scott, see, I've been blessed and fortunate enough. I am very close friends with the Burrow Toller family. Burrow Toller was the first National Football League African-American official. He also was the first principal in the San Francisco School District and the first police commissioner. He was on the first police commission as an African-American. They've named a school after Mr. Toller, and being around him, because he was the first in all of those. And at that time, being first was not only him, but he was one of the only African Americans to have any kind of position like this. So seeing what he went through and how he conducted himself and what kind of man he was, it made it easy for me to be able to do that because of his example and many other people in my life that gave me an example of what to do and how to be a leader.
All right, well, Kevin, as this time that we have to go to the chat room because it's not me just talking to you. Okay, so let me just point out that No Limits is being broadcast around the world. So they get to hear you and I and everywhere else from China to Japan or wherever inside the domestic United States, Canada, whatever. You get the drill. All right, but the audio, so as I said, No Limits is being broadcast around the world. The audio version of No Limits can be heard on iHeartRadio, Apple, Spotify, Google, wherever you get your podcast. Please hit the red subscribe button on YouTube, South Florida Tribune. We're striving for 1,000 subscribers. Please also comment, like, and share the broadcast. This is a classic. Don't you miss this. And we don't mind if you re-listen to it a lot because there's a lot to go and we're just scratching the surface. Also, you want to be a guest? Go to the chat room. I got a very active chat room. I'm going to get to those comments in a moment. Or send topic ideas to South Florida Tribune at gmail.com. If you want to advertise cost efficiently, no problem. Call me at 954-304-4941. We are broadcast live on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. Our website is www.southfloridatribune.com. You can find me on Twitter at Tribune South, and Candy Ebling is behind the scenes doing the producing as well as the magnificent job that she does on the website. Now to the chat room. Wonder if I could talk faster than any cars. Who knows? But that's the part I won't be talking too fast when we get to you, but I want to make sure people understand that this message will be conveyed later on in the show. So with that said, okay, let's go to the chat room. George Eichhorn, thanks for the comments. Outstanding guest you are, Mr. Anderson. George Eichhorn is out of Michigan, so Detroit area. Will Vogel, you know what? He's been waiting for this all day. So you know what? This kid here is a very up-and-coming young broadcaster, and he participates on these chats because he knows that he can learn a lot. And back to George Eichhorn, such a long and distinguished career that you've had. Well, your track record is nothing short of impressive anyways, Kevin. So, and then Will Vogel, back to Mr. Anderson. What is one lesson that you learned from each stop along your journey? You know what? That's a great question. How about addressing that for
him? That is a great question. One of the things that I believe that you should live your life each and every day is that you should be welcoming to everyone who comes into your life and be respectful for anybody and everybody who works with you, for you. One of the other things, I make a habit of when I'm walking down the street, if I see somebody who is down and out and needs some help, I try to help them. And, I didn't think that my kids were noticing that, but they talk about that each and every day. And so that's something that I'm probably most proud of, is that my children understand and they see that we have been very fortunate in our lives, and there's other people that have not been, and that they know that the right thing to do is to reach out and help your fellow man.
All right, well, Vogel, grand slam home run on your part, WV. All right, George Eichhorn. And we reiterated this point, but George also knows about it well. Being a Big Ten guy, he probably should anyways. But there are the comments. I'm glad that Maryland did join the Big Ten, as it has opened up to student athletes to great eastern part of our nation and close to the capital. You know what, Will? How do I should be thanking you for this, okay? But, here's Will at it again, and he's saying, thank you for answering, Mr. Anderson. Scott puts on a great network here along with a bunch of others, and I am blessed to be a part of it and blessed that he's one of my mentors. So there you go. You know what? And I think that's the one thing we can say, that, Kevin, that you've certainly been obviously a mentor and a positive influence. So with that said, let's go to the next question. What's the difference between being an administrator for military college to a conventional university? Because obviously you've seen both sides.
Well, my experience at the academies is that the cadet athletes are true cadet athletes or student athletes. They're there for the love of the sport, to be and get great academics, and to be a leader and do the things that we need to do to fight for our freedom for this country. Working at other civilian schools, it depends on the school. I look at 2 or 3 of the schools that they were committed academically, And then there were other schools that the academics didn't come first. I'll
Right.
just say that. And that it was more of a money proposition and getting, well, I'll just say that they were athletes first and students second. And sometimes they weren't even students at all.
All right, well, back to Mickey Delaney. Hi, Scott. Hi, Kevin. Hi, Mickey. How you doing? Mickey, no relation to Mouse. It's definitely no relation to my dad, Mickey. Okay, so, but, I had to get the Mickey plug in there. That was cool. Michael Consicio, enjoying this, Scott and Mr. Anderson. Well, Michael specializes in basketball, so if anybody could probably be familiar with basketball on the East Side, it would definitely be this guy. All right, so with that said, okay, how challenging is it to recruit, especially, Kevin, football versus the powers in group of 5 conferences?
It's challenging. When I was at West Point, we were in the height of the conflict in the Middle East. And so, I mean, going into somebody's house, particularly with the parents, and trying to assure them that, this was going to be a great thing for their young person was challenging. And I mean, being a parent myself, I could see where it'd be very difficult looking at what we faced in Iraq and Afghanistan, that would be a hard choice for any parent or any young person to take. And so I'm highly admirable of those people and that had chosen to attend the academies and be part of this great country of ours and protecting, again, our freedom. So it was challenging, but I'll tell you on the other hand, particularly my last 2 years with this football team at Air Force, these young men were tremendous and had the will to win and was not going to take losing as an option. And I mean, both years we went 9-3. We went to 2 bowls, beat Louisville and beat Baylor. And so I think that's a statement in itself that, these young people accomplished something that most people didn't think they could do. And it was my blessing and my privilege to be part of that.
All right, now you have a great segue to where we're going. So here's what we've got. Okay, to go pro, you said sophomore, freshman, immediately dinosaured. In there, we're talking about, it looks like Paulskene, but let me go ahead and mention to go pro, sophomore, freshman, dinosaur in. Afterwards, you have to serve the 5 years, as you mentioned, right? Now, you said an example of this was Paulskene was a freshman, sophomore, and then he transferred to LSU because he would be a high draft choice at number 1, and we know he's going to get paid. So what I want you to do, Kevin, is please go ahead and explain the dynamics of how that really works out. You know what I mean? Because this is really loaded. What I want you to do, though, I'm going to break it down 2 ways, okay? Number 1, you're going to talk about the first 2 years, the dinosaur part, and then you'll talk about the 5 years. And now, you know what? Before we go further, though, you ever heard of Mel Farr Jr.?
Yes.
Well, he's my co-host on the South Florida Tribune Broadcasting Network, and Mel works with me on Inside the Pigskin Sports Exchange wherever I put him. And I'm telling you what, it's getting intense. But I know what question we're on, but we got to get to the chat room because they're the ones that are giving us what we need. Okay, kneecap biting with the Troy Lions. All right, Smoking Jeremy B. You can find him on the Professor and the Pupil on Sunday mornings here on the South Florida Tribune Podcasting Network. And so let's go ahead. So what I'd like you to do, and maybe one day what I'll do, Kevin, is I'll bring on the show with you and I and Mel, and then we can talk some football because obviously he knows you well enough. So Mel, get ready. You and I are going to go ahead and mention you're going to be on the same show with him. And he says his middle child is a graduate of the University of Maryland. Well, hang on with the NIL. That one's coming up. So, all right. So let's address those couple of questions. I'll reiterate them again. We'll talk about the GoPro. Your sophomore, freshman immediately have to be dinosaured afterwards. And talk about that one first. We'll go to part 2.
So this has been going on and off where athletes that go to the academy were able to play professional sports, particularly what we're looking at now, football, and then serve their country as they're playing professionally. There was a congressman or senator from Wisconsin recently who wrote a bill that says that none of the athletes would be able to participate in professional football while they were serving their 5 years after their graduation. Now, there were some negotiations, and what has happened is that freshmen and sophomores that are now attending the academy are still able, if they are fortunate enough to go and play professionally. But this incoming class will not have that uh, same thing for them to be able to do. Now, they could serve their 5 years and then go play, but that's Roger Staubach's probably one of the only people
No
who did
kidding.
that. And so, and that was way back when. I just think that it's a mistake that if there's a young man who could go and play professionally and still serve his country, there's no better way of exposing the academy and promoting it than that. Because, like Eric Villanueva, Eric was at the West Point when I was there. Every Sunday when he played for the Steelers, the first thing they mentioned was he was a West Point graduate and he served in the Army. You can't buy that kind of media. I mean, you look at it, we've done analysis on it, and I mean, there's no better way to promote the armed services and what young people could do in an academy other than, being on TV on Sunday and having that mentioned. So I just think that it's unfortunate. I think it's a mistake, and I think that there's nothing but good that comes out of it, particularly when we're not going to be seeing, like Georgia having 8, 9, 10 kids drafted in one draft. I mean, if we had one every 4 years, we would be very fortunate. So I just think that we're missing something valuable that could be a positive for our military if they would allow or change their thinking of how they're handling this.
Yeah, so what you're telling me, if I understand you correctly, Kevin, that the 5 years is a very big detriment to what everything could be, and that number one, if you had the 5 year situation, revisited a little, you could get a better caliber of player. And the biggest thing people have to understand about this is it's not like you're in wartime either, where you need these individuals. These guys have an opportunity to serve their country, but you also have to understand, and I know you do. Okay, but a 5 year, that's a detriment. The military academies, we all know, instill discipline like no ever. My dad was in the Army before I was born, so I can certainly respect his military background. I have other people, like one of my good friends, Steve Ballesteri, used to do some shows on here, was heavily involved with it as well. But I guess going back to the 5 years, you're saying that's a real big of a detriment to what the whole idea should really be?
Yeah, well, prime example, we talked about this the other night.
Right.
That young man who's pitching for LSU.
Right.
The first 2 years of his college experience, he was at Air Force. Had he been able to pursue a professional career, he would have probably stayed at Air Force and then been able to be drafted and go on. But so he had to make a decision before his junior year, because once you go into your junior year, you take the pledge and you make the commitment. So he looked at this and said, a lot of money on the table. So he transferred to LSU, and he could be the number one draft choice in the Major League Baseball draft coming up. Everybody's saying more than likely that he'll be a top 5 pick and could be the number 1 pick.
And the individual for whom you're referring to is paulskene, is that correct?
Paulskene, yes, it is.
Very good. All right. Now a question that Mr. Vogel's waiting for, and I'm sure a lot of other people beside him. Well, let's talk about the NIL. Okay. You say that the military academies are not eligible for it and can't accept it. So do you feel that in some cases that's also a hindrance as well?
Well, I think it's a great thing for the academies, because you don't have to worry about, that's another thing you don't have to worry about. And now most of my colleagues, if not all of them, are worried about that, because if you don't have an NLI program or it's not robust, the recruiting process and getting great players to come is going to be very challenging.
Right.
Now, I support the NIL the way it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be where these young people could go market their services and be paid for them. But now, when you talk about these co-ops, these collaboratives, whatever you call them,
Right.
it's just the legal way of how we used to do it when it was illegal for them to have the paper bag with the money in it going out the back door. But it's going to be interesting how the NCAA is going to deal with this, because it's still a violation.
Right.
If you read the rules, that no donor is supposed to outright give a student athlete or a potential student athlete any money. Well, now with these collaboratives and everything else, the donors are getting together, they're pulling their money, and I mean, they're paying these kids. And so that I have a hard time with. Just like we've lost the value of the scholarship. When I was growing up, I mean, in your neighborhood, your family and everything else, if you were going to go to if you got into university, period, that was big. But if you're going to be an athlete and you're going to get a scholarship and you're going to play for whatever university you're going to represent, that was a community thing where they celebrated. Plus, I mean, there's value in the academics. So now what we're saying is well, what I want to get across too is that you can't tell me there isn't any value, because one, if you look at most student athletes, if they had to compete on their own to get into most of these universities, they wouldn't be able to.
Really?
So then you get priority registration. So you're going to get the classes you could get. Your son, my daughters, had to go another year in college because they couldn't get all their classes to graduate on time. And so now there's a distinct advantage there, because you look at most of the young people who come in and play college athletics and take their academics seriously, they're graduating in 3.5 years. And then by the time they're a senior, they're working on their master's degree.
Oh.
So there's a value in that. Plus, we're paying room and board, we're paying for their books, we're paying for their meals, we're paying for their medical. So what happens if, okay, we start paying these young people, but we say, okay, well, we're paying you, but you're going to pay us for your scholarship. You're going to pay for your meals, you're going to pay for your uniform, you're going to pay for everything. I mean, I think if that deal was ever to take place, scholarship's a pretty good deal.
That's amazing too. And when I think of the word lost value of scholarship, those are loaded 4 words. They really are, because everybody doesn't realize the value of them, But I know sometimes they're on a year-to-year basis, depending on all that. We'll get into more of that later on. But, when you look at the sum of the whole, Kevin, and the whole of the sum, losing the value of scholarships, really strong stuff.
Well, and we'll take football as an example.
Okay.
So you have 1 or 2, 3 people that are very good.
Right.
Then you have people that play. Then you have people that back up. And then you have people that just practice. So how do you determine who gets paid what?
Right. Yeah. I'm with you.
Okay, so and if I'm the offensive lineman and the quarterback's getting $1 million and I'm getting $200 and I get free pizza at Shakey's every now and then, well, if I miss a block and he gets tackled, some people aren't going to say, I don't feel too bad about that. So, yeah. I mean, that creates another dynamic in the locker room that's not healthy. But, again, it is what it is. We have to move forward. Unfortunately, and this is what really concerns me, is that no one's doing anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
The NCAA has just let this train out of the barn, and we don't know how fast and what track it's going down.
Right.
And now we're looking at the government getting involved.
Right.
So as a taxpayer, there's many more things that our Congress and Senate should be looking at and doing rather than getting involved in intercollegiate athletics, in my estimation. That's how I feel about it. And if we do, and if the Congress gets involved in this, nobody wins because everybody's going to have to give up something. And right now, nobody knows where it's going, or they have not put their arms around it, and that's a very dangerous thing.
Okay, obviously we've talked about name, image, and likeness, but now let's talk about the transfer portal, everybody's favorite subject, the free agency of football, although I kind of wonder how that happens with the military schools. But let's just talk about, Kevin, the transfer portal in its overall sense. What are your thoughts about the transfer portal?
I was always for it.
Were you?
Yes, and it didn't go well with my colleagues. But why shouldn't the student athlete have freedom of movement when, as an athletic director or as a coach, I was able to go? If another school called me, I was able to go there. There were no penalties. They didn't make me wait a year to start working at that place. I just think that, if we're following capitalism in its truest form, then that has to be part of it, because in our country, there's freedom of movement. You could go from one job to another. You could go move to one house so to do that and to put a hamper on student athletes and say, well, okay, even if you do transfer, you got to sit out a year. I just don't think that's fair.
Well, not only that, the one thing we can't lose sight of is college coaches change jobs all the time looking for better opportunities. So, why not give the athletes an opportunity to go to another coach that wants them, the way I look at it. Do we condemn a college coach for moving from one opportunity to another? But meanwhile, these kids are left with a coach that didn't recruit them in the first place. And then all of a sudden, we don't know how the new coach is. And we're going to get to one prominent example later in the show. But I just want to make sure that those points, like I told you, Kevin, no stones unturned. And we know that with coaching movement being what it is, that these players have the right to be coached and mentored by whom they feel will give them the best mentorship and best opportunity to make the pros.
Well, absolutely. But the other thing that we need to look at is that we need to look at that these young men and young women go to schools, and like you said, the coach leaves, so why shouldn't they be able to leave? Because most of the time, the young man or young woman aren't going to the university. They're going to play for that individual. But here's the thing that everybody's concerned about, and here's what I hear talk about. There's 40% of the young people who have gone in the transfer portal that are stuck there.
Really?
Wow, so now people are saying, well, okay, so now what do you do with them? Well, they had the freedom and they wanted to move on. But now, people are saying, well, if they don't go to another school, they should be able to stay at that school and continue to get their scholarship, which I find to be a little bit ludicrous to think on that level, because these young people have chosen to do so. And many times it's not the young person per se, but it's all those people behind the scenes. It's the parents, it's the handler, it's, the grass is greener on the other side. Right. So I don't think that it's the burden of any school that a young man or woman chooses to transfer and nobody, or there's not another place for them to go. I'm sorry, but that's your bad, not ours.
Yeah, and to me, what it sounds like, you can't take your cake and eat it too, Kevin. You made Correct. A decision to go out there and gamble on it, and sometimes all gambles don't pay off. And I'll tell you what I mean by that too, okay, Kevin, a couple of ways. Number one, the one thing that college basketball and the NBA do well, it lets you measure yourself by the draft, and if you don't think you're being elevated high enough, then you're allowed to go back. But that's not the case here. I mean, it's one of those things where when you go to gambling in Vegas, you're gamble, you lose your money. I mean, you put it all in the middle, and Vegas isn't giving you any sympathy for what you put out there. And I mean, like you say, the grass isn't always greener, and these are choices they have to make, and it's not an easy industry, which leads me to my next point: college football playoff expansion. Now we have a 12-team playoff coming in. Some thoughts about that?
Well, it's definitely going to give more teams an opportunity to pursue the championship, and with that, it means more money to each and every school that is in the federation. So, I mean, I liked it when there was a named national champion, because here's the difference between having this and not having it. When you were at Thanksgiving, Christmas table, everybody could sit around the table and argue who the national championship could be, and it keeps that conversation live and going. But another example, whoever wins the Super Bowl, nobody ever talks about the second guy. They just talk about the champion. So I thought, from a marketing standpoint and good media, you keep those conversations alive and you're able to have healthy debate. But now we've left all that. So now the thing to look at is, with the expansion of the playoff, what's it going to do with the conferences now?
Right. Don't worry, we're getting to that too. But I'll tell you what, if I was a play-by-play guy, I'd have you as my color analyst, because the one lesson I'm going to teach you, Mr. Kevin Anderson, you know what the acronym GMTA stands for?
I don't.
Great minds think alike, my friend.
Okay, there we go.
I'll give you more on. I'll give you another one of my favorite motor oil ones. STP for the motor oil. Slow down, think and proceed. I'll bet you probably had to work by that one a lot, haven't you? So
I wouldn't have come up with that one, big guy.
You would have?
I would not have.
Well,
so now I could add two. I could add those two to my repertoire.
You do it. You do it. I have no problem with anybody that ever does it. But you have to promise me that anytime I need you on as a guest, you give me the thumbs up like you did on this one. Fair enough?
Okay, Scott. That's a deal.
That's a deal. Deals, boy. So, all right. So I'm going to go back to the 12-team plan. I actually like it. I think it's actually long overdue anyways. I really do. I mean, will it create the March Madness type of effect? No, but I think it gives you the best 12 to me. Is a better way of doing it than what we've had to deal with. 1 minute we got computers, the next minute the +1, although I think the +1's better than what they had before, but I'm not going to get into that. That could be an whole another debate anyhow. But so for the most part, you feel that actually the 12-team playoff will more than suffice for college football?
Yeah, I think it's going to satisfy the fans, and that's the biggest part of this, and it's going to satisfy the media partners. I don't know how much further it goes into a season or adding games. Is it healthy for the student athlete?
Right.
So that's a big question there. The other thing is, it's not like that. Football's not like basketball. You get a couple good people there. And now if you look at basketball too, the older teams seem to have just as much success, as the one and done teams.
Right.
So, in football, though, you have a unique set of teams that are going to be at a championship level.
Right.
And then the other ones are, prime example, TCU had a great year, but they go to the championship, and I mean, they were just outmanned, plain and simple. But I'd love to see schools get an opportunity like that. But I think in the scheme of things and what we're looking at in the world of college football right now, there's an elite group of teams that are going to be good year in and year out. And maybe every once in a while, you'll get a team to sneak in there and compete for a national championship.
Well, I mean, here locally in my neck of the woods, we had 2 Florida schools move all the way to the Final Four. Florida Atlantic University had a year for the ages, and the Miami Hurricanes even made it to the Final Four. You want to talk about energy in my neck of the woods. those two teams certainly electrified the community. And let's not kid ourselves. No, Southeastern University on the Division II side won a championship. So it was a tremendous spring. I know we're not talking a lot about college basketball, but when you talk about the success of FAU of all teams being in there, to me, you never know if there's an FAU somewhere along the way, and that 12 that plays at the right time and catches somebody on their heels. So I think that this 12, they may have finally gotten it right. They really did, because everybody wants to see underdogs prevail. And they always say on any given day, NFL, college, whatever, you don't know when that upset, let alone when the stakes are a lot higher on the big stage.
Well, Scott, I must apologize too, because I forgot a couple of years ago, University of Central Florida won the national championship in football. So I apologize to all the Floridians for forgetting that.
I don't know. Did they really?
Well, they claimed it.
Yeah, right. You said it.
They claimed it. So anyway, but that was a good example. I mean, they had a tremendous run, and they were a good team. But I just think that, even looking at them from a resource standpoint and from a player standpoint and everything else, they just couldn't. I believe they couldn't measure up, and they couldn't play 4 quarters with a team from the SEC or from the Big Ten. The one thing I learned when we went from the ACC to the Big Ten immediately was our first home game that we had against Ohio State. I'm standing on the field, and the Ohio State team runs by me, and I'm saying, this is going to be a long day, because they had some very big, strong, fast people. And I think that's the difference between the elite teams and the other teams. It's just the physical nature of the makeup of the players is different.
First of all, Kevin, there's no need to apologize. And number two, under this 12-team format, University of Central Florida would have gone to that type of playoff, and then they would have had their opportunity. So apology not necessary. Central Florida under this format would have gotten in there, and then at that point, there's no self-proclaiming national championships. I will tell you, though, that program, since George O'Leary put it on the map, has showed some continuity with, I think, Josh Heupel got involved, and of course now Gus Malzahn, and I think Terry Mohajer is the athletic director, and I worked with him over at Florida Atlantic University. And Terry, I took a job, I think if I remember, at Arkansas State before he took on this. So, it's not like I don't know people in the industry that you're in, because, when you're working in college football, it's a really, really small window where you work with people on a regular basis. I'll have a very interesting dilemma here, because now I'm heavily involved with the Miami Hurricanes. I really, really am. So I'm going to have to spend as much time as I can in Coral Gables doing their media days and getting down there every once in a while. And of course, I'm going to certainly see all the Canes games. But more importantly, what I'll also be able to do is being able to, with Tom Herman over at FAU, they're in my backyard, so I'll be able to participate in some of those events as well, that are closer to home. So, but it's pretty neat. So, all right, let's talk about Maryland going to the Big Ten. I segued and threw a tease out there for it. But as we continued to talk, and I kept researching the whole thing, so let's talk about the Maryland to the Big Ten. You have the ACC network developed teams, and their hands are tied because of the long-term deal, and it's harder for them to leave. So give me your thoughts on how all of this transpired. And then you have to wonder at that particular point what goes on, because let's face it, you masterminded to me one of the biggest coups that you can get Maryland in there. And we've already indicated that market had something to do with it. We're not going to let the media dictate everything, even though I'm a part of it. But that was, to me, a great move, getting Maryland into the Big Ten. I mean, let's face it, the Big Ten and SEC are way ahead of the cash cow. People can say what they want about the Big Ten because of their inability to win national championships on a as frequent as the SEC. But the thing that we both understand is the Big Ten was first when it came to the instant replay system, and they're always making money. So they can say what they want about the Big Ten, but everybody's copying the Big Ten. But let's talk about how you really pulled off the Maryland coup to get them into the Big Ten. And then talk about, on the second part of the question, the ACC situation.
So right now there's a National Conference of Athletic Directors. So we would get together in small groups and, friends, maybe have a beer, smoke a cigar, and just talk about things. So one of the things that I remember we talked about before I went to Maryland is looking at the expansion and how it went when when the Big Ten took Nebraska in. So I had a friend who was close to some Big Ten people and just started talking about, do you think it would be possible? So he reached out to some people. So at first, Commissioner Delaney, I don't think was interested. One of the reasons why they had gone to Maryland years before that, and Maryland said they had no interest. But then what happened is the ACC was able to bring Notre Dame in as a partial partner.
Right.
That changed the landscape. That changed the thinking of the Big Ten. And so now it was Commissioner Delaney having a conversation with me saying, are you still interested? I talked to the president. I've got the board of trustees involved in it. And so we started to explore it. But the thing that people didn't realize, and it came out, and for good reason, this wasn't totally a money deal. The money was great, but if you look at it, Maryland's a flagship state school, and all the other schools in the Big Ten are, except Northwestern, and academically, it's not a bad school. And athletically, they're competitive as well. If you look at the ACC, all those schools there's private schools, public schools, all kind of different schools, and there wasn't a lot of collaboration. With the Big Ten, the schools are involved academically. The professors get together from all the schools. If you're a student in one of the Big Ten schools, right, and you want to pursue a class that your other school might not have, you're able to pursue it in the Big Ten. Right. They have various abroad programs that every school can work with one another and take advantage of that. So there were many opportunities beyond just the money that the Big Ten was more attractive because it looked more like Maryland than any of the ACC schools. The other thing is that the football brand was being neglected.
Okay.
And at that time, Clemson and Florida State, I think they were looking at a way out. We were looking at scheduling how many games. At one meeting, we decided that we're going to go to 9 games a season rather than 8, then come back and we do 8. Well, Clemson had to give up a couple games against South Carolina and Georgia because we changed the schedule, then they changed it back. So, there were just so many things to look upon that we could have taken advantage of right, being a Big Ten member that we couldn't do in the ACC. And it worked out for us. Now, Scott, one thing I share with you that I haven't shared with many people.
What's that?
That move personally impacted a lot of friendships on my part.
Oh, did it really?
Yeah. Mr. Swafford and I, John was a big supporter of mine, very helpful. It created a wedge between us. And then there were some of the athletic directors that didn't particularly care for us going on. But that's another topic for another day.
Right. Well, first of all, you had to do what was in the best interest of the Maryland program in general. And, I want to point out to Jeremy B, and I want to get this one up here. Thank goodness my guest spot was at 7:30, so I am here. Well, Jeremy, the reality is, we're going to do another show with Mel Farr and I and Kevin, so you're going to be a part of that broadcast when we put it together before long. So thanks, Jeremy. I'm glad you really are on there. So, all right, you talked about Nebraska. Here's my observations on that, okay? Nebraska, to me, was jealous of the fact that Oklahoma and Texas took away what we call the Oklahoma-Nebraska once upon a time. So, but actually, to Nebraska's credit, what the Big Ten wanted out of them was a strong historical football type of school. And the reality is they got them, but now what's backfiring, okay, against Nebraska is guess what? The Big Ten's a whole lot bigger than what you had at that time, the Big Eight. And as a result, Nebraska football is getting humbled like I've never seen a program. So when you go into the Big Ten, you're getting the big payday, but you're getting hammered. And, one of the matchups I have to watch every year, Kevin, is watching Nebraska and Wisconsin. Because I'm going to tell you, the Badgers are using the Cornhuskers as whipping boys. I mean, you think about Wisconsin, solid, pretty good school, right? And then Nebraska, who had their way, and all of a sudden they get to Big Ten. You ever heard of that thing called humble pie, right, Kevin?
Well, you hit the nail on the head. The Big Ten took Nebraska because of its football brand. Because if you look at all the other things that came along with it, they lost their AA stand. So every member of the Big Ten is in the American Association of Academics, which is, prestigious. And so Nebraska lost that as well. And I mean, they haven't been the football program that they used to be. And, they have suffered competitively for the last couple of years. So I believe that if it was done all over again, Texas and Oklahoma would be in the Big Ten.
Really, you know what? I think you're right on target there, Kevin. I really do. But meanwhile, Nebraska is getting the Cornhusker ripped out of them. I couldn't help using a corn reference, so I apologize for using what you call a food analogy. So, and even Jeremy's funny, and he's one of the most comical guys that got Nebraska even loses to Purdue. That's pretty good. So, Jeremy, don't worry. When you get to know this guy, you'll find he's probably the most candid character we have. Yeah, I just think that, to me, that Nebraska got hammered. I mean, hey, listen, they didn't collect the paycheck, but now they're the whipping boy instead of being the whipping boy. All right, so as we continue on, Kevin, with the Big Ten theme a little bit, are the Big Ten and SEC done expanding? Because we're going to break this down into two parts. We certainly saw USC and UCLA joining the Big Ten. So let's talk about the first part of the question, okay? Are they done expanding?
For now, I think so. And one of the reasons why is the media partners aren't going to put any more money in the pot.
Okay.
So I know that the athletic directors and the presidents in the Big Ten and the SEC aren't willing to give up a piece of their share to bring somebody else in. Unless ESPN or Fox, CBS, NBC come and say, okay, you could bring these people in and we'll give you some more money. So that's kind of stopped. But the other thing is that, and this is just speculation on my part.
Okay. I'll take your speculation all day. Go ahead.
But you have in Oregon with one of the richest alumni in the world, who has a unbelievable company that promotes and works alongside intercollegiate athletics, and they couldn't get any traction and moving someplace. So that tells you something.
Right.
It also tells you that you look at, this is all driven with the media markets.
Right.
So, I mean, the LA schools, I mean, that was a no-brainer. And now it's just going to make that even more competitive. But the concern I would have for the Los Angeles schools is that they're not competing in the Pac-12 anymore, and that the Big Ten brings it every Saturday. So it's going to be very competitive for them going into the conference. But, I think that what I would like to see is that football and basketball is their own separate entity.
Right.
Particularly with the football travel, it doesn't really impact the student athlete. So when you look at that, it's a misnomer. But what it does impact most of the other sports. at one time they were talking about in the NCAA in federating the sports. So soccer would oversee soccer, volleyball would oversee volleyball. But the other thing you could do, you could break it up however you want to. You could have 6 quads covering the states where you could have that competition. So you could keep it local, and you could keep it where the travel would not be expensive.
Right.
And then you could still have the championships and everything else. But, I know, like baseball.
Okay.
Baseball, you travel during the week, you're gone all weekend and everything else. So having to go for USC to have to go play Rutgers on a weekend,
Oh God.
that's a tough trip for baseball and for some of the other sports. So It's going to be challenging, and hopefully they'll be creative. The other thing, and I started to talk about this before.
Right.
There's a void in leadership.
Right.
I mean, in the NCAA. Now, I can sit down with some of my colleagues, and if anybody's listening now, they'll say, oh, no, he didn't say that. But it's true. I mean, everybody sees this. And so now hopefully this new president of the NCAA will get people and sit down and fix some of these things that can, because if it continues to go any further, Saturday's just going to be Sunday. So you might as well just look at it because it becomes professional. If you start paying, well, in California, they're trying to pass a bill now where every student athlete will be paid.
Right.
So my question is, there's not enough TV money that goes around that's going to be able to pay these bills and others. I mean, there's schools now that are making millions and millions. Well, let me go back because we talked about this, Scott.
Sure.
When I worked at Stanford University,
Mm-hmm.
they had a $490 million endowment for the athletic department.
Wow.
Most of the schools in this country don't have a $490 million endowment. And now it's probably almost $1 billion in that. And Stanford was going to cut sports because they still couldn't maintain the amount of money it costs to run these programs. Wow. So what does that tell you?
Right. Okay.
I mean,
That's
there's one place I'm very familiar with that built a very beautiful, very efficient, very good football practice facility, locker rooms and everything else. They're still wondering how they're going to find $100 million to pay this thing off.
That's true. All right, so I have to bring this up. USC and UCLA are going to experience the same fate Nebraska is going to do. You know why? Because they're not used to going to East Lansing in the middle of the winter, Ann Arbor, Purdue, Indiana, Wisconsin. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. The Big Ten for the Rose Bowl, they're used to going out to Southern California and all that. But when these schools have to come to the East Coast, Midwest, and so forth, let me tell you one thing. I wonder whether or not USC and UCLA will understand what hand warmers are, because if they don't, they're going to learn awfully quick. And all of a sudden, though, the playing field isn't going to be even, because a lot of the Big Ten schools know how to play in this, and they're going to have to adapt to it. They really, really, really are. And I'm sure you probably thought about that just a little bit to an extent, haven't you?
Well, Scott, so it doesn't even matter what the weather is. Okay. The one thing that we experience at Maryland, our first year, going into all those places that you talk to, and you're playing in front of 100,000 people. And, look at the Pac-12. I think Oregon sells out. Washington, if it's a good game. SC was struggling for a long time. They're just coming back now. UCLA can't get anybody out the Rose Bowl. So, I mean, that's just a different dynamic going in there. And to be honest with you, I think if you look at both California schools, they don't know what it takes to be that Ohio State, that Penn State, because of the support they get throughout the community, throughout the administration, throughout the state. Gary Williams, you brought Gary up. So Gary tells me, he shared a great story with me. So he becomes a head coach at Ohio State.
Right.
First football Saturday he's coached, he goes out to get his newspaper, and the entire neighborhood have Ohio State flags up and everything else.
Right.
He had to run to the hardware store and get a couple Ohio State flags to put in his front yard so people knew that he was part of the team. The extent of how this goes, it's unbelievable. And until you experience, you can't fathom everything that comes along with it.
You know, Kevin, it's amazing how you brought that up. When you think of the amount of stadiums that are between 70 and 100,000 in the Big Ten, let's have a little fun with this one, okay? Let's talk about the fact that Penn State, Happy Valley won't be Happy Valley for those teams going in there. We know Ohio State's an intimidating place. I've yet to be there before. Camp Randall, I didn't know anything about the jump around until I went there one time against Penn State. I thought the whole place was going to fall apart. Pardon the ignorance, but now that I look back on it, it's a bucket list place. Michigan State, and of course, I just alluded to Nebraska. So when you look at all these places, they're going to be playing in much bigger crowds. And then if you add the cold weather to it, as George Eichhorn would say, you'll have the long johns too. I mean, let's not kid yourself. It's cold, but when it's cold and loud, that to me is a very, very strong combination, Kevin, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Going in, it's an experience of a lifetime. Now, the great thing for the UCLA and USC athletes experiencing that, there's like no other. It's very difficult to go into a stadium which is half full, people aren't energized.
Right.
They're drinking Chardonnay. They're talking about going to the ballet or whatever. No, these folks, that in the SEC, these folks eat, drink, and sleep football. And this is, we won, I think, 4 or 5 games, but that whole year was quite an experience for everybody. And it definitely opened our eyes to what football in the Big Ten was all about.
Well, I will tell you, my choice of alcoholic beverages, I don't drink much in this order, would be wine coolers, would be margaritas, and mudslides. So depending on what mood I'm in, I'm not here to send an alcoholic message, but those are all. And if you really want to get dangerous, go to New Orleans, have a Pat O'Brien's Hurricane. And I'm telling you one thing, your head is going to look like a top when you get done with that quiet hangover you're about to deal with. But we'll leave it at that. All right, so let's talk about expansion further on the West Coast. So you touched on it anyways. Now I want to go a little bit deeper into this, okay? Will the Big Ten ever expand to Oregon, Washington, Cal, or Stanford? And I think that from a logistical standpoint, travel-wise, if you have at least 4 schools in that part of the country, it would help a little bit. And, let's face the reality. If you can snap up Cal and Stanford in the San Francisco Bay Area, or you're able to get Phil Nike or Washington, where you have Seattle, and then you have Nike money, I think that those would be sensible alternatives should they ever get to the West Coast, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I think that's the move that they should be, or they probably are looking at. The other thing is the SEC is looking at expanding. So I believe that it could come down to 2 conferences instead of the 5 we have now, because the Pac-12, I don't know how they're going to be able to exist.
Right.
It's just that, they were told that if they did and formed their own network and did all this, that they were going to be reining in money. Well, the reason why USC and UCLA have left is because none of that money materialized. Right. Martin Jarman at UCLA is working with a $20 million deficit, if not more. USC, they're struggling, and they have a very robust alumni, but it's still not enough, because they need that financial boost to be competitive and be able to keep up and do what the other teams are doing. And so I think that it's going to get to where It could be 2, maybe 3 conferences. I think the next one you have to look at is what the Big 12 is going to do.
Right.
But again, not to take anything away, but if you look at those teams and the component of it, I don't know how it instills a matter of excitement within a community, because it's not like the SEC or the Big Ten schools.
Right. All right. Well, with that said, now you're touching on something that we were going to talk about, and I'm going to expedite that question just a little bit. Okay. You predicted that the Big 12, Pac-12, ACC, their best chance of survival is to actually merge. And you talked about the fact that Oregon State, Washington State, Arizona, and ASU, they have no place to go.
No. I mean, they could go back to the Big 12, but I don't know where I don't see that happening. I think that if you looked at it in totality, and what the best and next move should be, is that they should look at seeing if they couldn't combine and come together as a unit. And then I believe that they could look at the way that the SEC has looked at it, as making sure that, you could have people stay in their certain regions and then come together and have championships. But again, it would be best for the student athlete, because you're not taking that time away from the classroom, and you're not, traveling from coast to coast. So I think that if you look at it, that makes the most sense. But again, a lot of things make sense that haven't been done. So, I mean, if they made me king for the day, that's what I would be looking at. But the only thing about that is, Scott, you and I talked about this.
Yeah.
There's 3 commissioners. If you consolidated those 3 conferences, there's only 1 commissioner. And who would that be?
Yeah, no. A guy that I met over at the Conference USA championship game when FAU was in it was a guy by the name of Merton Hanks, and he's one of the brightest
I know Merton, yes.
Oh, do you? Well, you know what I want you to do then? I want you to talk to Merton. Okay, tell him to come on with you and I and Mel and Jeremy, and I guarantee we'll have a real bit. I'll put you on my biggest sports show, the Sports Exchange, if you can pull that one off.
Okay.
Well, let's do that. Oh, worry, I told you you are definitely never going to be a one and done. Now, where you're going to be, whether or not your signal's any good in Prescott, Arizona, I don't know. But let me tell you, when you get my wheels turning, okay, that's another story. And by the way, my Motor City Man-Mouth hat should be arriving any day now anyway. So,
okay.
So I want to go over a bunch more things. I'm glad we have a significant amount of time. So you said you took a lot of pride in your Commander's Chiefs Trophy with Air Force, not Army. Do you feel that's one of your biggest accomplishments?
Yes. To be part of, I don't know, accomplishment is the right word, but it was one of the best experiences that I've had.
Okay, well, experiences is a good word to supplement it.
Working with Troy Calhoun and his staff, God bless Nate Pine bringing me here and let me be part of this. I mean, the last couple of years has been a tremendous experience, because the one thing that this has allowed me to do is that for the majority of my time, I've been able to spend it with the coaches and the players. And I haven't had to indulge the grown-ups as much as I have in the past. And trust me, that was pretty nice.
Well, I know when we talked, okay, this is really cool stuff, okay, that you've accomplished everything except a college football title. That isn't the worst thing on the planet, isn't it? A college football title. Now, if you would have been in the 12-team format, that might have been checked off the box. So go deeper into that one.
Scott, I mean, I have truly been blessed. And a lot of times I have to ask, what did God see in me to put me in this position? But I'm not questioning or complaining, because I've had a tremendous, tremendous journey. And I've been with so many great people, but so many great young people. And, everybody says, well, they benefited. I benefited from them, because the one thing that anything happens each and every day for me, I wake up with a smile because I know I'm going to interact with all of this young, brilliant energy that, makes my day each and every day. And to be honest with you, it's not even a job.
Right.
It's not even a job. It's a ministry, and I've been able to just be part of this and be able to be influential in lives and have people be influential in my life, and really expanded who I am and what I am. Because I'm just a poor boy from state school, and for me to get and do the things I've been able to do in these positions and doing this is just it's the best.
All right, for all you people out there in the chat room as well as around the world, do you think what I'm doing is a job? I want your feedback in the chat room because me personally, I don't really think it is, but we're entitled to everybody's opinion. So so with that said, you talk about academics. Every time I get a media distribution thing, because I have a lot of media distribution partners that send me information, I can tell you how fast they get up on social media is when I have a good academic type of accomplishment. Any accomplishment, I move it a little quicker across the post board. But you talk about the fact that you've had very successful academic programs and you inherited some poor academics. So I'd like you to elaborate a bit further on that.
Well, it's always been my major motivation being in this line of work to be able to get these young people an education so they could better their life and move forward. I mean, I can't tell you how many young people that I have worked with that were first generation college students.
Right.
And it hadn't been for athletics, I don't think they would have gone to college. So, that's the beauty. And I go back again talking about the value of the scholarship. But here's something that really is alarming and concerns me that is happening now. We have coaches that cannot go into these young people's houses and talk about academics because the first thing these young people say is, "Oh, coach, you don't think I'm good enough to go to the league?"
Right.
And so now they say, well, we can't even go in and talk about academics. We talk about the program, we talk about our record, we talk about the uniforms that we wear, the places that, our practice facility, our locker room. And that's another thing that really upsets me is that if you look at these locker rooms, they've got bowling alleys, they've got barber shops, they've got pool tables, they got Xboxes, couches, and everything else. And I mean, it's just over. Don't need it. In my estimation, don't need it. But the whole thing is, well, we got to be competitive. We have to have what the Joneses have down the street in order to attract kids. That's what this has all got to, is that I'm around people and I hear them complain about the young people of today, how they feel entitled or everything else. Well, time out, folks. We created this.
Right.
We created this. The other thing that I found too that's interesting is I don't know how competitive we are bringing up our kids and having them be competitive. As a country, we're not as competitive as we used to be. And, that all started with, and Scott, are you ready? Because I know you're going to get some complaints on this one.
I don't care. When
we started, everybody gets a trophy.
Yeah.
That's not healthy.
I agree.
There's times in life where you win and you celebrate, but there's times in life where you lose and you have to look at the reasons why you lost and that you have to take it seriously. And now, I could tell you right now, most of the locker rooms in this country, college locker rooms, you could go in there for 2 minutes, they're upset that they might have lost the game. After that, they're on their phone, they're talking about going on. I would sulk for days if I lost. Maybe people might say that I was a bad loser, but losing impacted me as much or more than winning because I did not want to lose, period. Nothing. And so, I think the edge of the country has been decimated by this. And I'll go back again, and you asked me, one of the beautiful reasons why I am here at the Air Force Academy and was at West Point, because those young men and women wanted to win. And they knew that they had to start learning how to win when they were competing as an athlete, because where they could have ended up losing cannot exist, can't happen, because in losing there's a lot of really bad things that happen. So that's been my experience, and again, it's been a wonderful path that I've been on.
Kevin, I gotta ask you an easy question for a change. Okay, ready? Because they get even harder as we go forward. Okay, what type of cell phone do you have? Do you have a smartphone?
I have an Apple.
Oh yeah, me too. So that's a great minds think alike, and Apple people think alike. Good stuff. So the reason why I asked you the question about kind of cell phone is, do you have a Rolodex in there so high with all the students and all the people that have impacted there that contact you on a regular basis, looking for advice and are thankful for what you've done for them?
On June 30th, they're going to have a celebration of my career. And one of the things that was important to me is that the young people, some of the young people that I impacted, I've invited them, and I want them to be there, and I want them to speak. I could have had other people there, but I think the most valuable thing that I want to share with the people that will attend is how great these young people are that I've been able to work with, and to hear them. And I just want them to speak on, how these events in their lives have changed them, because they're tremendous young men and young women doing great things for our nation. And so, that's, if there's been a reward, a gift, a trophy, that's it. I interviewed a coach a long time ago, and I've always lived with what he told me. I said, how do you measure your success? And he said, it's not in the 4 years, 5 years that I have these young people. It's after that. It's when I'm walking in the grocery store, or I'm at the airport, or wherever I might be, and a young man or woman come up to me, Coach, I don't know if you remember me, but I'm so-and-so, and this is what I'm doing now in my life. This is my family, my significant other, and things. I mean, there's no better gift than that. There's no better gift than that. When I talk to the young people that I've been with, and they tell me what they're doing and everything else, right now I'm getting goosebumps, because I just close my eyes and I look at all these young people, and what they're doing is tremendous, in our communities, in our country. And, I'll always have that to live. Nobody could take that away from me.
All right. But my original question was, and I'm glad you added more to it, how many contacts do you have in your Apple phone?
Oh, a lot.
That's good enough for me. That's all I wanted. But I'm glad you added more to it. Don't get me wrong. So I think it's cool. A guy of the reason why that question was asked, Kevin, is for an individual like yourself who has been in this business so long and has affected so many people. This should be the ultimate compliment from an individual like you, who has affected the lives both in and out of the service academies. And I think it's just incredible. I mean, wherever you get honor, in my opinion, I've got my honor just sitting in front of this camera with you, talking about a lot of different things, and we're just going on until we're done. And we're a little bit far from done yet. I still have more to talk about, but I'm glad I have somebody like you willing to put it all out there for us as well to do it. Now, here in my neck of the woods, two coaches that I've really looked so much upon is Mike Jarvis, obviously former St. John's. He worked at FAU, and Howard-Schnellenberger. First question, should Howard-Schnellenberger be in the College Football Hall of Fame? Because what really annoys me is this guy was a program builder, took his beating, and I think the 500 and the record, to me, there should be times where certain things are weighed based on the man's overall resume. Howard Schnellenberger first. We'll go to Coach Jarvis.
No question. I mean, Miami wouldn't be Miami today without
Right.
Coach. I mean, and it went beyond football. Well, Miami's big on brand. Coach is the one who branded Miami.
Right.
Coach was the one who opened people's eyes and got folks down there and built it to what it is today. There's no question that he should be in the Hall of Fame. No question. I mean, he did tremendous things. Now have some people question some of the things that he's done in the university did, but they do that to all of us.
Right.
And, I mean, you have to be competitive in this business in order to stay anytime at all. But I mean, what he did, I'm going to go back to what you just said a minute ago.
Yeah.
He impacted positively a lot of kids from Florida that weren't being done with what he did and have that kind of encouragement and influence on their life. So yeah, no question. I'm with you on that, Scott. So you and I should vote for that.
We should. Well, make sure you give me a vote. I'll make sure I definitely get in. But bear in mind, though, too, Kevin, I worked with him at the University of Miami in 82 and 83. And then I ended up following him up to FAU. So I know what kind of, and he's a role model, like a father figure to me. The other one I mentioned, too, is Mike Jarvis, great basketball coach, but I think he's just a better human being. And he's come on my show from time to time as well. But I love Coach Jarvis. Every time I needed him, he was always there for me. Like I said, he's a father figure to me. I have him in my phone anyways. And anytime you need me, give me a call. He's always been there. And I'll never, one of my best stories about Coach Jarvis, though, is I'm covering FAU in a bowl game in Detroit. I believe it was a Motor City Bowl at the time, but they ended up taking on, I believe, Central Michigan. And then I ended up, it just so happens Coach Jarvis took the Owls down to Lexington. So I go through the FAU PR department. Listen, I'm doing both of them back to back. Get me in Rupp Arena. They did. I mean, let's face it, I'm one of their writers anyways, right? And Coach Jarvis and I just sat in the locker room and just talked as long as we wanted. Now, here was the interesting part about it is that FAU's plane couldn't get out of there. We were stuck on the runway for 4 hours, and I'm driving down I-75 right near Monroe, and I had to go to a rest area because I couldn't see anything, and I got to the area probably around 8, 9 in the morning. We got the game, and Rupp Arena was ready. But Coach Jarvis has been there with me all the time. So, you talk about participation. I knew you were going down this road with me. I just think the amount of bowl games at 40-some now is totally absurd. Do you agree?
Scott, when you watch these bowl games, how many people are in the stands?
Exactly.
So let me ask you this. Do you think those young men that are playing in those bowl games, because one of the things we talk about is we want them to have a great experience.
Right.
Well, part of having a great experience in competing is to having some people there that can cheer you on. I mean, basically what we're doing now, it's just a TV game.
Right.
I guess, and I look at it differently. Many people will tell me that it's meaningful that they're able to compete in a bowl game and that, it enhances the student athlete experience. So I'll go for that. But again, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier about the participation trophy. 6 and 6 should not allow anybody to go play in a bowl game.
Well, they're even going 5 and 7 if they can't.
Well, Scott, don't even get me involved and start talking about that. But it's all driven by economics, and so we're going to get what we get with that. But I'm old school, and I want to see people in the stands as well as watching it on TV.
Well, I'm old school too, but I will tell you the only thing I do like about the bowl games, only one thing only, is it gives these kids a chance to play one more game in front of pro scouts. That's the only thing I like about them, because, anytime you can get as many eyes on you, game film with NFL scouts, that's the only value I think of the bowl games. The rest, I'm totally with you. I'm old school too. Okay. But I can't find nothing else positive playing inside of an empty stadium with very little media coverage to go ahead and play in a participation postseason game, whatever you want to call it. I don't even care.
Yeah, well, you're right. You're right.
Pro scouts, no problem. One more opportunity to get in front of film, and then you have the All-Star games, which is another story. I won't get into that, but that's the only thing I care about the bowl games, or just one more chance for these kids to get in front of people, because you never know. The reality is, Kevin, you don't know where that hidden gem is going to come. Once upon a time, Walter Payton played at Jackson State, right? Okay, so you have smaller schools. So with that said, I want to go back
Well,
to.
hey, Scott, let me interrupt. One thing you said, and I hope
Sure.
I didn't forget. It just slipped my mind. I'll come back to it if it comes back.
Well, no, that's okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to stay in the South. Where do you think Miami and Florida State could be headed to?
I think they're primed for the SEC, along with Clemson.
Yeah.
I think that if you look at it from a football standpoint, that makes the best sense. When we left the ACC, I know there was a big concern that Florida and Clemson would leave too.
Right.
And part of the reason why the ACC network now exists is because Maryland left. And so what they wanted to do is make sure that they tied up the multimedia rights with the other schools, and they did a good job of doing that. But now they've left negotiating power from being able to make a new deal. And if you look at all the money out there now, and they can't get into the game till what, 30, 32?
Right.
So, I mean, when we left, I think we were getting 28, 30 million.
Right.
And so, I mean, at that time you could compete, although it was challenging to compete with that. But now when you're dealing with all these other conferences, particularly the Big Ten and the SEC, when you're looking at the Big Ten and each member getting $75, $80 million, makes it hard to compete.
All right. Well, I'm going to throw a couple things your way because I know you're the right guy to answer it. Number one, if I were the Big Ten, I couldn't get Miami and Florida State in fast enough, because we know the Big Ten loves to recruit in Florida. We've seen how many they're able to do. Notre Dame, to me, they'll live off that independent thing, but at some point they got to make a move anyhow. I think the logical place is the Big Ten. Whether Notre Dame will get in, I don't know. And I still think if the Big Ten should get those other four schools that we mentioned earlier. But let's talk about Florida State and Miami. I think the Hurricanes and the Seminoles should go to the Big Ten. So the Big Ten is talking about, now you got LA, or the California market, you got the Midwest, you got East. The only thing you don't have left is the Southeast, and Florida State and Miami together. Now you're in the Sunshine State. What's left? I mean, I don't think there's much left in Texas that they could go after. Miami and Florida State, to me, would be ideal fits in the Big Ten. What do you think?
I like the way you're thinking. And again, it just gives them further exposure. Right. It gets them into some big media markets. And then they are covering the four corners of the United States.
That's right. You're back to the GMTA again, and I know you're going to commit this to memory when it's over with, right?
I believe that when they were going through all these discussions, that the Big Ten wanted to move and bring in two more members, and one of those members was in the South, but they decided not to come.
Okay, well, it's fine. I said Miami and Florida State should go. And let's not kid ourselves. Florida doesn't want Miami and Florida State in the SEC.
No, they don't.
No, they really, I mean, they're sitting there saying, we don't want them. It's bad enough that they haven't, the Gators have struggled in recent years. I think the last time that they did anything big was with Urban Meyer there. But you think they want those two schools in that conference when that conference is brutal enough as it is?
Well, South Carolina doesn't want Clemson.
Well, there you go. So there are a lot of those schools that don't want these other powerhouses because they know they're going to experience the same thing that Arizona's faced. Arizona's never, I don't think they've ever been to a Rose Bowl. And I have a feeling that those other schools that we're alluding to, particularly South Carolina, will probably be relegated to a lower tier bowl compared to a lot of the major ones. We could talk about that another time. So let's talk about Deion Sanders. Okay, he did a marvelous job at Jackson State, then moved to Colorado, and obviously he had a large scholarship turnover. And I think they are headed toward the Big 12. So why don't you assess the job that Deion Sanders did? And let's talk about the Colorado thing. You're talking about large scholarship turnover. And when you talked about the fact that the lost value in the scholarship looks like Prime Time certainly might kind of agree with you. I don't think he has any value, or at least with the ones that they have. But what about the influence? And then I want to get into Bethune-Cookman a little bit. Let's focus on this.
So in the 2 years, Coach Sanders has brought the HBCUs in and given them visibility, helped put a brand on them, let them get some media rights and do some things media-wise that they weren't doing before. He got down there. I mean, people questioned, can he coach? Well, the team was pretty successful under his leadership. But the other thing that I marvel at is that Colorado sold out the stadium for the spring game.
Yeah.
They've never done that before.
Right.
And now their season tickets, I think all their games are sold out. Yeah. So, I mean, if anything, he's just put them back on the map and gave them some visibility. Right. Now the question is, he's going to have to perform and do it on the field. I think he's a tremendous motivator. But the other thing is, if you listen to him, he instills some discipline in these young people, and he treats every one of his football players like his son.
Right.
So there's a lot to say for that too. My question is, if and when he has success at Colorado, does Florida State say, why don't you come home? If they don't do what they're supposed to do. And I mean, they had a good year last year. So this whole thing is going to be very interesting. But a lot of people I know aren't a fan. I'm a big fan of his because, he did what they brought him in to do.
Right.
He said, he got everybody's attention. And now look what's happening. So, I mean, I just wish him the best of luck. And I think that he will have some success. Now, losing all those players that went into the portal,
right?
Again, you have to ask, was it him or was it them?
Right.
Now, one of the things he talked about is coming in there, I want you to do it, and I want you to do it right, and I want you to be competitive. Well, that kind of shows me that the last couple staffs that brought those kids in and seeing what the record is, how competitive were they? I'm not even talking about talent-wise,
right?
Because you can get talent, but when you get at this level and you're playing at this level, it takes more than talent because you're looking at somebody across the line that probably has as much talent as you. So now it becomes desire and heart. And so one of the things that I think he's done a tremendous job of, he's been able to look in these young people that he's bringing to his university and seeing that they have and will be competitive and have heart.
Okay. We had an incident in Florida recently, and I'm sure you probably followed it as much as I did, where Edreed was hired as the coach of Bethune-Cookman University. And recently when I was there covering the Daytona Tortugas over Memorial Day, it's hard to not look around Bethune-Cookman to realize that when you see it with your own eyes, that situation turned out to be ugly. And I think this is a black mark on Bethune-Cookman University. You had a guy like Ed Reed who was really ready, invested to do it. So how do you feel about the events, the way they played out at Bethune-Cookman University? And Ed Reed, do I want to say he's the one that got away? On the surface, it certainly seems that way.
So I think that we have to ask a couple questions.
Sure.
What was he told and what was he promised
Right.
going into the job?
Right.
And evidently, from what I've read and what I've heard,
Right.
they promised him one thing, and then when he got there and he asked for some of those things, it wasn't there and they couldn't do it.
Wow. That's bad.
And to be realistic going into this, I mean, you have these Power 5 schools that struggle financially.
Right.
So if you look at these other schools, I mean, they're operating on fumes.
Right.
And so we have to ask ourselves, I mean, again, we talk about we want to create a great environment for the student athlete. We want them to have a great experience. Well, was Grambling a couple years ago where they didn't even have enough uniforms. Right. And the locker room was messed where the kids protested, I believe, and they boycotted. So, right. I mean, you got to look at all of this and we got to see what are we doing, what is fair. And so I don't know what Ed's circumstances were, but it sounds like that he was promised a lot of things that they weren't going to be able to materialize, and he wasn't going to stay in that situation. And I've seen it before where coaches have to get up in front of these young people and not tell the truth. Right. I got a great story for you.
Sure.
This goes to show. There's an athletic director at San Jose State a long time ago. They were having budget issues and he wanted to save some money. So he went into his football coach and he said, they were playing, I believe, at Rutgers. Mm-hmm. So he said, hey, coach, here's what I need you to do. I need you to get on the red eye. I need you to go back to New Jersey. I need you to get off the plane, go play the game. After the game, get back on the plane and come home. Mm-hmm. The coach told him and said, well, sir, I'll do that. But the only way I'll do that is you go in and tell those kids what we're going to do.
Right.
They ended up going the night before, staying in a hotel, playing the game, and then coming home. But, I mean, you cannot run a program doing things like that. Now, like Scott, you and I talked about, there's a lot of extravagant things that are going on.
Yeah.
So I think that, you need to look at those and you need to see where are we going to make the investment?
Right. Yeah, it kind of makes you wonder a little bit too, because you think about it, Bethune-Cookman's coming down here to play the Miami Hurricanes on a Thursday night game on the ACC network. Listen, Kevin, I was at that last game when they rolled up 77 points. And, unfortunately, the reality is Edreed won't be on the sidelines, and Bethune-Cookman could be, if you thought 77 points was bad before, let alone the potential bad blood that exists with the Edreed situation, I wouldn't be surprised to see the Miami Hurricanes put up 80 to 90 points in that game because Bethune-Cookman's that bad. Mario Cristobal will do some good things in his second year. I know he will. Again, he inherits a situation. He's second year into his coaching tenure. I think he's going to do much better anyhow. But still, the Bethune-Cookman, I don't know about you. I wouldn't bet on it, but I would say if you're a betting expert there, that they should put an 80 spot on Bethune-Cookman. Do you think that's realistic?
Unfortunately, yes. And what they call that game, that's a money game.
Oh, yeah. howardschnellenberger used to tell me about the guaranteed games that finance programs, but you're right, it is a money game.
So, and to me, again, I'm going to go back to the student athlete experience. Going into a stadium and getting 80 put on you is not a good experience. Not a good experience. And, there's no question, because you're telling me this now, we're talking about it. There's no way that they could go in and compete against that team. I mean, we talk about it's the game and you play the game, but there's some games that, you go in and you don't have a chance or very little chance. And they're playing those games for money. I mean, if you look at some of these programs basketball wise, that they'll play their entire preseason for money.
Yeah.
They'll go in the season in their conference play, and they'll be 0-4, 1-4, 2-4. And so, I mean, what experience, what does a student athlete get out of that?
That's true. But you know what's amazing? Your responses are so good. You led me to another follow-up question when it comes to college football. And it's probably one that a lot of people would like to hear. The FCS taking on the bowl subdivision number 1, and the game that probably stands out to everybody is Michigan and Appalachian State. I mean, but let me give you a little tip on this one though, Kevin. I'm talking to a friend of mine who's a prognosticator here in Southern Florida. He says there's no line on this game. What do you think is going to happen with this game? And his name was Mark. I said, Mark, I don't know why I feel this way, but I think Appalachian State's going to give Michigan a game. And I don't know why, but they're the defending champion at their division. I think they're only getting paid $500,000 for the game anyways. And I don't know. So you know how it is. Sometimes you have to ride your instincts. So you get certain feels about certain games. Don't sell this App State short. What do you think happened? Appalachian State walked into Michigan Stadium and beat them, and everybody's like, and now everybody's afraid of these FCS teams because there are more of these teams that meet the eye. Can you see? I mean, give me your thoughts on the Michigan Appalachian State game because I got to follow up after that.
That was the worst $500,000 Michigan ever spent.
Isn't that the truth?
And I mean, anytime there's an upset like that, what do they refer back to? That game.
Oh, yeah.
They say that's really one of the games that started all this. And so, I like you said, on any given Saturday, a team could win. But I mean, if you don't have the Jimmy and the Joes, it doesn't matter. So, this whole thing is one of my mentors, John Kasser, used to tell me, he was the AD at Cal when I was there. Right. He said, recruiting is everything. Coaching's overrated.
Well, the side story was that Michigan didn't hesitate to get Appalachian State back again and won the second time around. Maybe it was to save face with Michigan that they're 1-1 against Appalachian State. But let me tell you, whatever the payment amounted to, I was glad Michigan beat Appalachian State the second time, but it'll still never be the equivalent to that monumental upset for sure. And and I'm sure they paid a little bit more money in what we call the Let's Save Face Bowl, okay? Because that's exactly what it probably amounted to. All right, well, look who we have back, Will Vogel, who I guess we woke him up with that one. I went to the game that UMBC beat Virginia in the NCAA men's basketball tournament. And you know what I got out of that whole deal, Will? I got a free pizza because of the upset. I think Little Caesars was sponsoring it. I didn't hesitate to get my pie and my crazy bread. So, all right, let's go to Will here a little bit. What are your thoughts about that upset in college basketball?
Well, Scott, but we talked about this. It's easier to do that in basketball than it is in football, right? Because in basketball, you have two good people, and then you have some other people that get rebound and play defense, and it gives you a chance. And now with this transfer, well, I mean, look at the tournament this year, all the upsets and people.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go back to what you said. It's now about looking at the transfers and also having a more mature team. If you look at the FAU team, I believe they were 23 and 24-year-olds.
Right.
If you look at it. And, the other good thing that I know the coaches were complaining about the portal, but it makes recruiting more of an exact science, because when you go and recruit high school kids, they're playing against, from one end of the spectrum to another, that, they're not always playing against great people.
Right.
But when you get someone in college and you see that they're playing against good competition every night, so you have film on them, you're able to see what they're able to do. Plus, by the time they're a freshman or sophomore, you've had them in the weight room, so they're bigger, stronger, faster. You've got them developed. And so if I'm a coach, I'm going to the portal because I'm pretty much going to get a sure thing in that rather than take my chances on high school. So I'm going to go back to something you said earlier, though. If
Sure.
we look at the mid-level teams and schools, they're going to have an opportunity now to go and get high school kids that they might not have ever got before because they're being overlooked or they're not being recruited because they're looking at the portal. So there's good and bad in everything, and so I think that could be a good thing for the mid-major schools.
Well, Dusty May, before he took that job, after he signed the agreement, said this is almost like career suicide. And once he looked at the facilities, and what I'm going to be doing is having Kevin Cooney, the former FAU football coach, on, I believe, a week from Thursday. But then all of a sudden, Dusty May found a way to work around it. And you're right, he maximum. But the job he's done, he overcame rough facilities, although obviously the Final Four run is going to get a lot of that squared away anyways. But, Dusty May, to me, and I had a chance to meet him, I went to a press conference or two. It was just unreal. The job he's done. And, to me, so he actually gave mid-majors some hope, but he also realized with a mature team, continuity there. There are a lot more schools that could follow the Dusty May model.
Yes, exactly. No question. Well, you look at Kennesaw, what he was able to do there. I mean, that was remarkable too. Now, the downside to having a great coach and having that kind of success, you're probably not going to keep him or her.
Right. That's true. All right,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. Complete your thought.
No, I'm through with that. So,
all right. Well, everybody out here is probably wondering what we both think of the one and done rule. I know the NBA is trying to get that fixed later on, but let's talk about the one and done rule. A lot of coaches have gone out there and utilize it to their advantage. I mean, John Calipari, Coach K, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes from now. But what are your thoughts about the way the one and done was worked out in college athletics? I know it got Kentucky a national championship, but the one and done, I never cared for it.
Well, again, if we go back and we talk about it, intercollegiate athletics is supposed to have an academic component to it.
Right.
There's no academic component to it. I mean, some of those kids come in and they never go to class.
Right.
But the other thing is the people who benefit mostly from that is the NBA.
Right.
Because they don't want to end up babysitting these kids. And that's when you draft someone right out of high school,
mm-hmm.
I mean, these kids have not had any life experience.
Right.
So now you're dropping in millions of dollars,
right.
and they're going on the road. They're sitting up in their room playing video games, or they're going and getting tattoos or whatever. Right. And, I mean, they have so much idle time that's the devil's workshop in many cases, where at least if you did what baseball does, and either you can let them go before, or if they go to school, then they can't leave till their junior year.
Right.
I think that's best for everybody. If there was a model that I would like to see, that's what I'd like to see. But, I love America, and I love, what capitalism has done for many people. And
right.
So those are the rules that we play by. And so, I mean, that's what it is. And if a kid could go out of high school, my concern, though, is if you look at most of those kids who jumped out of high school, they had a very short career.
That's true. There are very few LeBron Jameses out there. There's a couple here and there that did all right. But now, but you bring up an interesting point, though. That's why I like the G League here, that keep them out of class, let them go there. And then if they're able to play there 1 or 2 years, they become draft eligible. That's a different animal altogether.
But Scott, if you look at all, so if the NFL had to take these kids out of high school,
right?
I mean, it takes 3 years to develop them.
Right. Good point.
They'd have to have a minor league. That would be a major investment for them. Right now, they've got the best of all worlds because we're their minor league. We
right.
get them bigger, stronger, faster. We get them ready, and then they go to the league.
Right.
No better example than that. I mean, Major League Baseball, they're just cutting a lot of minor league teams because now they have a direct line between the colleges and Major League Baseball. So, you know, I mean, again, it's all driven by money. And if you look at this, I don't know if we're doing the right thing for the player or for the athletes or for the students. You look at someone who plays in the NFL.
Right.
If you have a 10-year career, wow.
Right.
And still, when you're retiring, you're 34 years old, and now you've got to think about, what do I do now? Because this is, in most cases, this is the only thing they know.
Right.
So, I mean, if you look at all those components, there shouldn't be a professional athlete that goes bankrupt.
Well, I agree with you there. Time will tell whether or not the XFL and the USFL amount to real developmental leagues. I think that's still early on. If I had the choice to think which one would survive better, I would say the USFL because they're owned by Fox, and and they're just looking to fill a program. I don't know about the XFL. All I do know is they lost $60 million the first year under a private enterprise where you got Fox's money. That doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out which one I think will be better for the long haul, but time will tell on that one.
Scott, I'll tell you this one.
What's
if
that?
I was in the PGA right now, particularly if I was Rory McIlroy or I would be extremely pissed off.
Yeah.
I mean, from what I heard the other day, they offered him $200 million just to come over and play, let alone anything else.
Yeah.
And for them, well, you talked about it earlier. Now, that was a backdoor deal.
It was, wasn't it? Yeah, I know.
So, I mean, and now they're talking about making some of those players whole. Well,
good luck.
Yes, exactly.
All I'm saying is good luck. All right. It even gets more interesting. Now, I have actually a few more questions, but I think we've had a lot of fun and we've covered ground, but there's a little bit more to go. So I'm glad you can stay with me, Kev. It's just unreal the amount of ground we're going to cover here. So let me ask you this, okay? Were you surprised at the retirements of Jay Wright, Roy Williams, and Coach K?
No, not at all. And if you look at it, I think there's 3 letters, the reason why they retired. NIL.
Right.
And even the transfer portal. Jay Wright said it the other day. Jay could not be as competitive as he was at Villanova because the school's going to be limited if they do anything with the NIL.
Right.
And getting into Villanova and transferring and everything else was going to be somewhat more difficult than any place else. I mean, look at all the success Coach K had and how he's adapted to the change. But now this would just drive him nuts. Same thing with Coach Williams. I mean, they got out and they said, I've done what I could do, but I don't want to play in this game because it's a tough one. I'll just say that. There's other words that come to my mind, but this is family show and I don't want to use that. But I mean, Scott, it's there's so many challenges. Many challenges. And to be truthful with you, with some of the current leadership that's coming up, they're not prepared. They don't understand this. And I mean, I don't know where this is going, but I just pray and hope it goes in a positive direction. And that's all we can do. But I mean, there's so many things out there that need to be fixed and addressed. And I don't know if there's enough people that can do it.
Let's face reality, Kevin. Okay. Coach K managed to deal with a one and done. Okay. Even though Duke is probably above that. And he played John Calipari's game and played it pretty good. So to me, this is a game that really has come down to a different thing where you have the NIL, then you also have the transfer portal. A long time ago, these are considered violations by the NCAA.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, I don't see as many schools being put on probation because of them, because it just shows you everybody was breaking the rules. Now they're just legalizing the ability to break rules. At least that's the feeling I'm getting out of this thing.
Well, no, Scott, they haven't changed some of the rules. They're breaking the rules, and they're doing it knowingly because they're trying to be competitive or, make this thing work, where there wasn't there was some thought and there were some people that had some decent ideas and plans. And the majority of the folks didn't have the foresight, and they
Right.
put their head in the sand and said, oh, this too will pass.
Right. All right, Kevin, we talked about academics earlier, and I there's no way we can go on a show together without mentioning Bob Knight. We all talk about his fiery personality, and that's probably putting it lightly. But let's not kid ourselves, Kevin. The guy won 3 national championships, and he was a real big academic stickler. If I heard correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, he told Isaiah Thomas, "You're not getting your number retired until you graduate," and he had that policy with a lot of his players. So, do you think that Bob Knight will be appreciated in legacy, not only with what he did on the court, but what he did academically?
No, no, because too many people look at the things that were exposed that weren't positive.
Right.
And, let's just be honest, some of the things he did and that we don't even know about
Right.
was not right. And to be honest with you, he didn't handle the situation with his mentee and his former player in Mike Krzyzewski, and how he
Right.
treated Mike at the end. I mean, I'm not the right person to talk about Bobby Knight. I'll just put it that way. My mom said, if you have nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all.
Then you know what? You just said it there, so we'll just leave it at that. But I'm one guy we all can talk about is John Wooden. I don't know about you. Anytime I need advice, I go to his pyramids of success. And more importantly, though, Kevin, I had the good fortune of meeting Coach Wooden when I covered the University of Georgia UCLA game over at Pauley Pavilion. The pyramids of success. If anybody doesn't know what they are, get on Google out there and Google them. Coach Wooden to me is I think the greatest person in my life I have ever interviewed, at least when I was there. And one of these days I'll launch a channel here about my old interviews if we can get them on audio. Maybe that's a stretch down the road, but Coach, we can't say nothing good about Bob Knight, but I'll bet there's a whole lot to say good about John Wooden.
Well, I've had the opportunity to spend time with Coach, and in his later years too. And the thing that I marveled most about was how keen and how sharp his mind was, even when he was up there in age.
Right.
And a very humble man. It was a wonderful experience spending time with him and just listening to him and what he was, and all those young men that he coached and how they turned out and how they had the utmost respect for him too. Just a tremendous human being.
I got to get a comment out there by Will Vogel. I'll actually post it myself because Will has been unbelievable throughout the show, and I'll just mention it on my own. I was shocked when Tulane beat USC in a bowl game this year. Well, well, you weren't the only one. What are your thoughts about the fact that there's a team like USC who's about ready to head into the Big Ten, and they got beaten by Tulane?
Well, Scott, I remember what I wanted to talk about.
Okay, good. I'm
So
glad
now
we
we'll
stayed
go
on long
back.
enough for you to do it.
Yeah, well, when you get up in age like this, it sometimes happens.
No, you look fantastic, but go ahead.
So when you look, and we talked about the bowl games.
Yeah.
But even with the bowl games now, unless it's that playoff, you've got a lot of people opting out. They don't want to play because they don't want to get hurt.
That's true.
They want to prepare and everything else. So that's another detriment to these lower, not as equal bowl games. So, but like we said, Tulane played a great game. They caught them on an off day. And so I think that if you play that game 2 out of 3, USC will probably win. But, they had a tremendous team and a tremendous season. You can't take anything away from them. And it was a good win for them in the program and the state of Louisiana and the city of New Orleans.
Well, amazingly enough, when we talk about this, 2 guys that I believe Frank Gore was one of them, and Willis McGahee I believe they were injured in those bowl games. And
Yes.
that's probably one of the hesitations where a lot of the guys are reluctant to do it because I don't know what kind of insurance policy they are. But unless you're playing for a national championship, you got to realize that, hey, maybe, depending on this, how important the game is, that really isn't the worst thing in the world if you have to pass on them, especially depending where you are in the standings for sure.
So I'm torn, and there is a dilemma. One is that protecting their future, but on the other hand, letting down your teammates.
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, again, times have changed, the world has changed, and so that's not as important as it once was. That, you know, the team lived with and by the team, and so I mean, now the team is second. It's all about me and what I could do. And like I said, I'm not casting any blame on anybody, because if you're looking at it with all the money that's out there, you can't blame a young person for doing it. I mean, the system created that. What do they say? Hate the game and not the player.
Right. Yeah, no, I get it. All right. 2 more questions, if you can imagine that. But boy, I think it's been fun. And this is a show that everybody would want to see multiple times if you're really about college sports and sports in general. Well, let's talk about, Kevin, the state of college sports now and the future. Do you feel it's corrupt right now? But we'll talk about now, future, corrupt. Floor's yours.
There's always been an element of corruption. I mean, we could go way back. So there's always been that element where there's always been people that have walked up to the line and then crossed it. So, you know, fortunately, we have many more great people in intercollegiate athletics than those who have cheated. But now, I mean, the rules have been made up, and we've been talking about it all night. This NIL thing, they're doing things against the rules right now. Right now. They're reading it, they know it, and everything else. And so I can't see. I just think what they're doing now is that it's making it easier to be competitive and do what it takes to be competitive, even if it's not the right thing to do. And the other thing is, I can't fault, you have people that are pursuing careers and making money and taking care of their family. And so now, I mean, you could be in a job for 1 year and you could get fired. So, I mean, it just puts everybody in a very difficult situation and trying to do the right thing, because I've seen a lot of people that were stand-up people and did the right thing, and they were penalized for it. And, well, I won't say any names, but we got examples right there where, as a taxpayer, upset and offended that the FBI and the government spent all that money on that basketball scandal. And they had people on tape, and those people got off scot-free that are making millions of dollars. And you went after some assistant coaches that now, I mean, there's 2 or 3 of them that have attempted suicide because they were put in a spot where it wasn't them. It was the entire organization and the head coaches that are still making millions of dollars, and they were on tape, and there's no doubt that they were guilty.
That's true. Man, you want to bring, all right, so let's talk about the fact that, like you said, so all right, let's talk about college sports now and the future. Let's narrow in on that one a little bit.
As long as we have these wonderful young people that want to compete and do the right thing, then it will be healthy. It's up to the adults to fix this and make it right, or try to make it as right as you can. But, you know, with human nature, there's always going to be people that are going to try to stretch things or, you know, not do the right thing. So it's just a matter of the adults getting their stuff together and looking at all the issues that are in front of us and fix and compromise and make it where it's fair for everybody and everybody can benefit from it.
Well, we know Brett Favre had some situations pertaining to Southern Mississippi University. Do you have any thoughts on what took place over there? Or do you have any knowledge of it?
I don't, but, you know, I mean, again, when you're young like that and people are influencing you with everything, not that it's right, but it makes it more difficult for people to do the right thing.
Okay.
Well,
Well,
I'm
now
gonna go back I'm gonna go back, Scott. The two academies that I worked at,
sure.
makes me feel good, and I work with people because those young people, for the most part, are doing the right thing.
Well, Vanessa Williams had a question, save the best for last. So we save the best question for last. Okay.
Okay.
So, and that's this. Finally, on July 28th, you're going to be moving to Arizona. You said Prescott, right?
Yeah.
And transitioning to other lifelong dreams. I mean, do you care to divulge what those lifelong dreams are, knowing you've had a very storied career in college? I mean, what you've done is nothing short of remarkable. And for me to have the opportunity, now that we've hit the 2 hour mark, to be able to have so much enjoyment coming in contact with you. And by the way, folks, Kevin Anderson and I came in contact on LinkedIn. So for people out there that realize how valuable that is, LinkedIn, to me, it's gold, because the guy that's gold is sitting in front of me on the other part of the country. So go ahead. You're free to take the reins here and tell me what lies ahead for Kevin Anderson, other than the fact there's enough interest here to create another show or two when it's over with. You look at it happen. You drew a lot of people out that don't normally come into this chat room. And now I'm on the hook here for a couple more shows. And you know what? It doesn't break my heart as long as you deliver the goods.
Well, Scott, thank you, and that was very nice of you. Very nice compliments. My family has been tremendous throughout my career. There's been things I've missed. There's been things that I wasn't part of with them. So now I'm going to be able to do more of that. I'm going to try to support my wife as she has supported me.
Wow.
I'm going to play a lot of golf. I'm going to raise some dogs. And I'm going to do a little bit right now. Looks like I might do some consulting, and then just sit back and enjoy this whole journey, and look and marvel at what these young people are doing that I've worked with.
Well, amazingly enough, you've given me another reason to come to Arizona. So here's what we're going to have to do. You and I, my wife and your wife, are going to have to go to Sedona, and then we're going to have to take the track over to the Grand Canyon. What do you think of that?
Absolutely. We could do what? Do you golf?
No, I'm so busted up right now. But you know what? I might pull out. I might go out there and hope once I get a little bit in better shape, I can go out and golf. I would be more than happy to golf with you. Just make sure we have a good cart so I don't have to walk.
Well, no. How about we do the show at the golf course?
Oh, now you're talking my language, Kevin. Come on.
There we go.
I mean, you might get me at the driving range a little bit and I can hit a few golf balls and make it look. I got to tell you, you're talking to a guy that once upon a time, years ago, won a trophy for most unusual form over in bowling. So if you want to go ahead and laugh so hard, that's the truth. It is. And I got to tell you another story about Dennis Rodman many years ago. When he was with the Bad Boys, I was covering the team on the Bad Boys. We were good friends. You know how it is when you're inside of a locker room. You know who your friends are when you need them all the time.
Yes.
And Dennis always came through for me. Mark my word. He's good peeps, at least then. When Chuck Daly was in the picture, what he did later on doesn't matter. I only know him for the interaction I have, which was nothing short of outstanding. So Dennis sees me bowling at the alley one time in West Bloomfield, Michigan. Hey, man. Hey, Scott, how you doing? Boy, I like your form. I'm thinking, oh, that's good to know, Dennis. So you know what I decided to do? Dennis, my bowling is like your free throw shooting. I know he was a very good free throw shooter, but he had a sense of humor, this guy. So I said, I got an idea, Dennis. You want to bowl a game here and see how we do against each other? Sure. Oh, no problem. I'm probably an easy victory, right? Okay. Well, as it turns out, he did beat me pretty good the first game. So I'll tell you what, Dennis, why don't we do this? Let's play one more game, okay? And the winner pays both, double or nothing. No problem. This guy got so many darn splits, it's ridiculous, and I ended up beating him, and he ended up paying for the 2 games. Not that they were worth a lot. It's the extent of my betting, okay? But it was just about betting a friend of mine that you got all the splits, you can't shoot free throws, but you're the greatest guy in the world. One of my buddies in the locker room.
Here we go.
No problem, and the memories are priceless. So, I mean, there you go.
That's what it's all about. It's the relationships and the memories. No one could ever take those away from anybody. So that's what my thing is that I've been able to meet so many great and wonderful people and experience a lot of unbelievable things in my life. So I've been truly blessed.
Well, listen, Kevin, I've been in the sports media for 43 years. I'm actually trying to go out of my comfort zone a little bit by doing more non-sports related. And I want to get back into my level where I'm able to do more one-on-one interviews. And I relish the challenge of anything I can do to go out of my comfort zone. But you're right. Well, you know, say what people want about mainstream media. I really don't frankly care. I think mainstream media provided me with the foundation that I've needed to go out there and do what I'm doing. And I am planning to write a book called Adjusting to New Media. It'll be a little while before I get going, but I have a lot of the basis of the ideas that I'm going to do it. And let me tell you, for somebody that started out in the business when he's 17 and now I'm 60 years old, you know, there won't be no shortage of stories there. But I think the one thing that people need to take from the show is, you know, social media is great. But when you have a social media outlet like LinkedIn that allows guys like you and I to build a relationship from across the country, and then all of a sudden you find out that those relationships will turn out to be, it's just unbelievable how you can use certain outlets to build lifelong friendships. And I don't know about you, but I'd like to feel in my mind that I felt that I built a great one with you, and I'm looking forward to doing a lot more stuff with you down the road, Kevin.
I would love that, Scott.
We're going to do that. I should let everybody know one more time.
I got one more question for you.
Yeah, go for it. You're asking me a question. I love it.
You're not watching the game.
You know why? I had a better alternative talking to you.
Well, that's very nice of you. Thank you.
I don't care about games. This is my game, man. The other stuff's all well and good. That's why you have all the different things you get to watch. It don't matter. If I have a show that's better than a game, you know what? That thing called a live button is there. And you know what? My voice, too, is never ending, man. It's like those little things over in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. You know, yeah, never ending God Stopper. Is that what they call those things? That shows you what I know. Will Vogel, tell them my Basket Bros is better than current basketball. You know what? I'm going to put this up there. I want to give my buddy Will Vogel a little thing out here. What we have over at Sideline Sports, thanks, Will, is that we have a basketball show which talks about the older days, like the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. But I suggested to my teammates that maybe we'll bring in one current NBA topic. We go with the three, and then I bring in lists. And this has been a fun show for a lot of people to watch. And now I'm simulcasting it to our network as well. So I enjoy anytime anybody to get me suckered into old-fashioned basketball, I'm hooked. So, but Will Vogel, you know, has a lot of good positive energy. He's young, he's developing, and that's what he is. He's young and developing. But that's a heck of a show that I team up with Sideline Sports. I should point out, folks, that since this never-ending Motor Mouth, and I will have Motor City Man Mouth caps in the next couple of days or so, and believe me, I'll be ready for our next broadcast, okay, that No Limits is being broadcast around the world. Yes, around the world, okay? The audio version of this show can be heard on iHeartRadio, Apple, Spotify, Google, wherever you get your podcasts. Also, please hit the red subscribe button on YouTube, South Florida Tribune. We're striving for 1,000 subscribers, okay? Please also comment, like, and share the broadcast. This is one definitely for a keeper. I'd like to think they all are, but there are some shows that you want to feel like obviously tell a lot more of a story. And this one is no question one of the longest ones I've ever done with a one-on-one interview or show, but it warranted exactly the amount of time that Kevin, you and I went out there and gave it. Want to be a guest? No problem. Send your topic ideas to southfloridatribune@gmail.com or participate in the chat room. As you can tell, we're putting them up there as quickly as they come, as quickly as we try to get them up as much as we can. Want to advertise cost efficiently? You would have hit a grand slam or a slam dunk with this one. Call me at 954-304-4941. We are live, as Brent Murphy said. We are live. Is that a good impersonation of Brent? I don't know. On Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. Want to go to the website, www.southfloridatribunegetsit.com. Gets it done. Follow me on Twitter at Tribune South. And we want to thank Candy Ebling for behind-the-scenes work and her ability to post a lot of the chat so we can keep the continuity going. Every now and then I'll go out there and do it as well. But, Will says this network is Dick Vitale. says, Scott, it's unbelievable, baby. But you know what, Will? You bring up an interesting point. Are you ready for this one? I'm glad that Will brought this up before we wrap it up here, since I put the prompts down. I work with Dick Vitale. He's a colleague of mine in Detroit back in the 70s. His show preceded Sports Talk back then, and George Eichhorn and I worked on it along with my first job, whether you know it or not, Kevin, was at ABC Radio as a producer until I graduated being on the air, and then of course the beat goes on. But any thoughts about what Dick Vitale has meant to collegiate athletics? I'm glad Will made a mention of Dick Vitale.
Oh, I mean, coaches college basketball, no question about that. And what he's done, and recently how he's fought and beat cancer, and how he's helped the Bovano Foundation. It's just tremendous. But I have one last thing to say.
What's that?
We need 1,000. We're looking for 1,000 people right now, folks. We need 1,000. Tell your friends, tell your family. We need 1,000.
Yeah, actually, I feel pretty good. We're over like 850, so we're looking to hit the stretch.
We're right there, big guy.
Yeah, I know, but we need to get it out there, Kevin. I need you to be my best publicist going forward.
We'll do that.
I'll tell you what. You do that. You help me get over the top. You find me a great restaurant to eat out at Arizona, and
no. I'm coming to Florida. There's so many good restaurants there. We'll go to Florida and have a good time.
Well, then I'll tell you, I'll give you a reason to come to Florida, because this has been unbelievable, man. Just being able to sit here and talk to you. I know it's been a while since we were able to put the pieces of the puzzle together, but I'm going to tell you, Kevin, I won't hesitate to bring you on other shows. Maybe they won't be quite this long, but then again, there aren't many that will be quite this long. But you know what? This is the key thing that I really try at the South Florida Tribune as we develop the broadcast side, is I want the best guests that I can get my hands on. I really, really, really do. And for me, content is king. And you know what? When I have people like you on there, then guys like you make me look like a genius anyway. So I'm only as good as the guests that I have to work with. So, what can I say? This has just been unbelievable. I've been building up in my mind that we were going to do this since we started last week, let alone a year ago when we began the process. But now I think the timing in terms of the network growth is really what it's been all about. And you know what? In the worlds of Tommy Lasorda, because God delayed does not mean that God denies. And mark my word, he didn't deny us tonight. And this is just Act 1 between Scott and Kevin. So with that said, folks, I want to thank everybody for joining us on this edition of No Limits. What an unbelievable, memorable night here, talking to a guy that probably knows more about college athletics than most of the people that are out there. Because look at the amount of information. You led me from one follow-up question to another.
Scott, I'm just an old guy telling stories.
And you know what? I'm an old guy looking to draw them out of you.
Okay, my friend.
You want to know one last story before I tell you, before I tell the audience goodbye? Many, many years ago, when I was covering a Monday night football game, Howard Cosell turned me down, wouldn't let me interview him. So, okay, Howard, who cares? Never really liked you anyways. But you know who helped me out? A guy by the name of Orenthal James Simpson, O.J. Simpson. And I was in the booth, and I can tell you right now, okay, O.J., I asked this guy the same question 4 or 5 times. He gave me 5 different answers. He said, Dan, that's a pretty good interview. And mind you, I was only like 18, 19 years old. But I guess, but I'm not going to condemn what he did elsewhere. That was before the other stuff. But, when you're a young journalist getting into business and somebody like that, of that stature, gives you a compliment, you certainly want to take it gracefully and knowing that you can build on that. And I think the one thing you've been able to do is do the same. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I said absolutely. I'm with you 100%.
All right. So meanwhile, folks, if I got long-winded enough, I don't know, but all I can tell you, it's been a BLAST. If you don't know what it sounds like, blast, and slap a couple more exclamation points to it, and there you have it. So meanwhile, once again, folks, this concludes this edition of No Limits. We want to thank everybody who's joined us in the chat room. It is so greatly appreciated by everyone. Yeah, and hopefully a lot of people that will see the show later will realize that when I go out there and bring people on, I give you my best shot, and hope that you'll enjoy these types of shows as well as the other ones that we have on the network. So with that said, so on behalf of Kevin Anderson, the jack of all trades, Mr. Maryland, Mr. Air Force Academy, etc. My name is Scott Morgan, Roth the Motor City Madmouth. Thank you for joining us on this edition of No Limits. Kevin and I have more work to do. In the eyes of Karen Carpenter of the Carpenters, we've only just begun. And I've got news for you. I'm looking forward to the shows that we have lined up. So good night, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us.